Hi, I'm Dave Sudia. Welcome to Building the Plane While It's Flying. Oh, and it's a 787. And it's being built by the crew and passengers. A DevOps story. First thing I want to show you is a very fun commercial from, I think, the late 90s, illustrating this point that I've used many times in my career, uh, showing a plane being built while it's flying.
Some people like to climb mountains. I like to build planes in the air.
I grew up wanting to be on a wing, wanting to be up this high.
Sometimes the temperature up at altitude will reach 60 below. It's brisk, it's refreshing.
You never know what you're going to come across up here. Canadian geese, mallards.
Owls.
These people back here, that's why I come to work. That's why I build airplanes in the sky.
We're not just building a plane here. We're building a dream.
I love this job.
I get a lot of thanks up here. When I look over there and I see that little kid, the look in his eyes, that's all the thanks I need.
It's pretty classic, and I found it to be useful in many situations in my career to illustrate what it feels like to do this job sometimes. I'm from a company called GoSpotCheck. I just want to walk you through who we are real quick so you can kind of get a sense of the context around the practices I'm going to be talking about. A field rep walks into a bar. We're a mobile field execution application. The classic use case I give is you have a guy for Pepsi who's the delivery person. He is dropping off at Walgreens, and Walgreens has an agreement with Pepsi that everything will be in stock and at eye level. And that used to be done on a clipboard, like, yes, everything's good, but now you walk in with our app. There's a sort of a data collection mission created in an admin portal, and then the information from the data collection goes back for near real-time analytics. And we're also moving into things like machine vision, where you can actually just snap a picture of the fridge that the Pepsis are in, and we tell you whether or not things are in compliance. So we have mobile devices, an admin portal, machine vision, workflows, a whole bunch of components to this. And those are driven by Kubernetes infrastructure, Rails monolith, Rails services, Go microservices, self-managed and managed third-party managed databases, just a whole gamut of technology behind all of this. We're about 100 employees, about 35 of that is engineering and QA, and we have what I like to say is 2.1 operations people, because my team, when I joined it, was 3 people, a manager and two individual contributors, with the manager largely being an individual contributor. And as much as he tries, he now manages 3 teams, and so he's not really a full individual contributor anymore. So who am I? I'm a senior DevOps engineer, and I put that in quotes because, as I'm about to get to in a second, I hate the fact that that's in my title. I am a Swiss Army knife. I write utility applications, I manage Kubernetes clusters, I deploy databases, I do all that kind of stuff. And my job in the last year or so has been the senior shift left engineer, as we've tried to get more of the effort around SRE, observability, security, all that stuff further over towards the developers and towards QA. So I want to talk a bit about the timeline of an effort we've had to migrate into cloud native technologies. The company started out on Heroku about 7 or 8 years ago. And that was a good choice. I would recommend a startup that's starting out brand new to go with Heroku or some other similar platform as a service. We outgrew Heroku, and we needed to move into something that would accommodate our scale a bit better. So we decided to adopt Kubernetes. That was sort of early 2018. And as we started to try to figure out how to satisfy that migration, we started mapping out all the things Heroku did for us and went, oh my goodness, there's a lot. And that started the mad dash against time to start getting all of these features out for our developers ahead of time. And this is where we really started building the plane while it was flying. So we managed to get a couple of the most key components out there. We had clusters, we had a way to deploy, which was Harness, and we started getting our cloud native applications deployed. We had a platform team at that time, and they were working with us pretty closely as an operations team to figure out, sort of like, how do we implement these things? We would work on the infrastructure piece, and they would work on the development, integration, and implementation piece. And that team ended up being dissolved in late 2018, early 2019. And the members of that team moved out into individual feature teams. So that kind of threw a rock into the gears of how do we continue to do this if we don't have that partnership and someone building out this platform? We got our first app migrated from Heroku in early 2019, and for the course of 2019, and on continuing on into the present day, this field moves so fast right now. I actually gave a talk a while ago called "If You Can Wait 6 months, You Should," because in 6 months the tools will be better. But about, it feels like about every 3 days a new tool is released that we could have used a year ago, and that continues to be true. But things are becoming much easier because of it. By the end of 2019, we'd gotten most apps migrated, and at the end of 2019, in December, we held a hackathon. And one of my senior lead developers, who's heading up a team, really knows his stuff, came up and to pitch his idea for the hackathon, said, "I don't really know what my idea is. I just want to know why this is so hard, and I'm going to dig into that." And that was a good message. It was a good wake-up call. I mean, he wasn't, calling us out or insulting anything. It was just, this is too hard. And I get that, because, at the time, the tooling that we had still required everyone who was involved to learn 85 different YAML files, and things were automated, but setting up the automation was very manual, right? We didn't have a lot of code generation or anything there to get new projects going. And so that's where we really started rebuilding the plane while it was flying, and working on plane V2 while we were up in the air with this thing. So it's been a process, and that process of how do you get into building a platform while the platform is already serving people in a cloud native world is really what we're going to explore for the rest of this talk. So what we learned through that sort of timeline process there is we have a variety of ops competency levels. We have some very senior engineers who like to dig in and really get their hands dirty in config, and that's where they thrive. We also have some very senior engineers who just want to ship it. They don't want to have to dig in to the dirty config stuff, right? They were very happy on Heroku because they could apply their high level of competency to the application itself and really focus there, right? And then we also have beginning people, we have QA people, we have support people who are involved. We have people fresh out of boot camp that need to, don't have a whole lot of competency, a high level competency in anything, or learning everything. And one of the things we really learned is the DevOps team can't be operations security, CI/CD, reliability, etc. Right? When I joined this company onto the DevOps team, I was the third person, and we were in Heroku. We could do all those things because there wasn't much operations, right? But as we've moved into more of a traditional infrastructure model, we're running VMs and we're running databases and Kubernetes. We can't own everything anymore because, say it with me, DevOps is a culture, not a team. Right, and that's why I put my title in quotes at the beginning of this. We actually ended up changing our team name this year to Cloud Ops, which is equally as ridiculous a word, but it was to sort of illustrate we're not all those things anymore. We're not everything that's not feature development, right? So how do we shift those things left? That's been the journey. And interesting questions have come up in that time. I was talking with one of our customer support people about the concept of continuous delivery, and pushing out every change and canarying builds so that we can validate them in production before they get rolled out 100%. And he said, well, doesn't that mean that constantly we're just going to be potentially breaking things for 5% of customers? How do we support that if we don't even know when it's coming, because it's whenever a commit gets pushed? And I did not have a good answer for him. We both Googled and found that all the continuous delivery articles are pretty much written by engineers who are so excited to push their code out right away. So if you've got that article, please send it to me. Otherwise, I told him we're going to have to write it. Let's talk about building the plane V2. We're already up in the air with a plane that we already kind of built up in the air. Now we're rebuilding it. The key for us with this is that this was going to be built by the people, for the people, but still while it's flying, we can't land it. So there were some principles and a plan that we put in place at the beginning of this year. First principle is to productize it. I'm going to talk about that in more depth in a second. Nothing can just be built by us. It has to be a cross-section of the organization. Decisions that don't require consensus. We can't get everyone on board with everything and get full approval ahead of time. sometimes we just have to make decisions and roll with it, even if they're not the ones that everyone agrees with. The plan was to do some working groups. We were going to start with a phase of development in the software development lifecycle. We chose like local dev. There's no formal document of phases out there. We were just kind of making this up as we went along, trying to choose what's relevant to that phase to work on and go from there. Because we were just trying this. This was a greenfield attempt to build this plane. So principles, productize it. I think, my opinion, don't at me. A common problem with platform teams is that they make things for them. And what I mean by that is, I think that generally the platform team ends up being, and in my experience in the places I've worked, ends up being the people who are most like, yes, I want to dig into config. And so they build things that use extremely complex orchestrations of Docker containers that you have to launch using a make file that you've edited in Vim. And I will 100% say that I love complex orchestrations of Docker containers that use make files that you edited in Vim. I live in Vim a lot of the time. I live in VS Code some of the time too. But the thing is that no one who's consuming it is of that mindset. Few of the people. You need to think about your platform as a product, even internally. You need to make things for the people who will be consuming it. So it needs to be made with users in mind, with user personas. And one of the things I did was I was able to get about 2 months of part of the time help from a product manager in our company to help me make personas and do interviews. To do that, we interviewed a cross section of the company and tried to really get an idea of what's driving people's development practices and what tools do they like and how do they like to work, so that we could then keep those personas in mind. We put those together. And while we did not have an internal product manager who really understood the problem space we were in, because they're all more, sort of commercially customer facing product managers for our product, which is not for engineers, just helping to go through that process and teach me a little bit about product management, right? That was incredibly valuable. So while we're still sort of, doing this with string, it was at least string handed to me by an expert. And dealing with the fact that there isn't a platform team. We don't actually have a dedicated team of people to execute anything we came up with to, when we're building this plane. So we decided to get people who are the personas, right? Like we ended up with sort of personas for, the dev who wants to get their hands dirty into config, the dev who just wants to ship it, the beginner, support, QA. Let's just get representatives from those people, from those groups onto each working group to validate and research and do the work. They're the ones who are going out and finding the tools, researching them, trying them, validating them, and in the end, making the decision. Our role as more of the operational experts, we pulled back and said, we're actually just going to be the library, right? Like my job on these groups is to know about all the options out there and to present them to people, not to be the person who chooses, because I have very strong opinions and they're not always the best ones, right? They're the best for me, but I am part of the problem of complex Docker orchestrations with make files in Vim, right? So it really had to be, hey, we could do that. We could use this paid tool. Here's the budget that we have, so that what we're operating in. But I'm not going to be making the decision. Y'all are going to be making the decision. And a key part of that is once the decision is made by these teams, this is the way, right? That's it. Like we might play with it and modify it a bit in the future, but as a growing organization, as an organization that is scaling up DevOps practices, we ran into this issue of everyone kind of wanting to do it their own way. And that's fine-ish when you're a smaller team and you just own your own stuff. But the way we were able to get buy-in on this whole process from people was really starting at the beginning with people being frustrated that their things didn't interoperate very well. And sort of a process of guiding people through the thought process of that's because everyone's doing it their own way. Right, we're at a point where we need to start standardizing, and it doesn't have to be, one person making the decision, but that, bringing in the actual personas, people who represent those personas as the decision makers, goes a long way towards getting buy-in on the tooling that comes out of it. It's not like, Dave made the decision about using this tool. It's, oh yeah, someone else in support decided that we were gonna, look for metrics here. So they probably have my best interests in mind, or as close to it as we can get to, which helps. This is the way, being the attitude from there on out, right? Like this is the direction we're going. You don't have to convert your old stuff like tomorrow, but any new things that come up, any new things you build have to be done with these tools from here on out. So the plan. We had a couple of attempts. The first attempt was pick a phase, like I mentioned, try to pick the relevant things to that phase. We started with local development, and we sort of, here's a screenshot of a spreadsheet we had where we sort of tried to think of all the things that would be meaningful to be production ready. And I could do a whole talk on that process itself. We went through a validation phase of like what is meaningful for local development, and then tried to start pulling stories out, and both in research, and then once we'd researched something, execution. And there were some sticky wickets getting that going. Getting members onto this. There was no dedicated time for this, right? This is a complete grassroots effort. So we tried not to volunteer people, but we tried to, I don't think there's been more than 4 people who, when I've put out in Slack, hey, I've got this group going to figure these things out and solve these problems. Who wants to be on it? That someone's been like, me, right? So even though we're not volunteering people, I have basically had to go out and identify the people we want on each team and go ask them, right? Time for planning, for execution, for doing this. This is not, there's leadership buy-in on this project, but not enough to get dedicated hours for it. So the leadership buy-in is, yes, whatever comes out of this is the way, is kind of as far as we've got with that. So that was difficult. People really had to be mindful and purposeful, people on the team, about how they set aside time to do this. And then encouraging adoption is something we're still working on. Once we have a tool chosen, right, and once we have a process worked out, getting people to pick that up as this is the way is always, I feel like, going to be the hardest part. Again, having that buy-in initially has helped with that. I think another piece is not forcing it, right? So it kind of worked. One of the most successful things and pieces of this was just rethinking things from square one. I think one of the most exciting things about being in a cloud native ecosystem is that everything is different. Like there's capability that is, and massive potential that is still untapped by a lot of tools and by most organizations, because it's so new, and it's not a call out. One of the things that came out of this was like using a stack of Helm, build packs, and the pack tool, and scaffolds, and you can go Google those in a sec, to basically move local development into our Kubernetes cluster. Then when we were doing the persona interviews, one of the main requests we got was, well, every time I have to bring up my stack, I'm launching like 18 Docker containers on my laptop, and it basically just, the fan goes from 0 to 100% instantly. What I really need is a laptop with 64 cores. And, I went, well, I can't give you that, but I can give you that in Google Cloud. So, we were able to just kind of like, let's break down with all of these approaches, like let's break down and throw out our current conception of how we do things and start back at the beginning and look at all these tools and see what can we do with them? How might things change? One of the places we were weakest was documentation. We've always been an in the office culture. It's been a small company, so it's always been a place where you could walk 10 feet over and discuss something with somebody. And as a result, we never really had a strong culture of documentation. The documentation was walking over to Paul and asking the question, right? Walking over to Mary Jane and asking the question. So, one of the things that got generated out of that initial brainstorming session was we have to write all this down, right? We have to have a place to write all this down. And then that begat even more documentation. As people got into the habit of writing things down, they started writing even more things down. And let me tell you what came in handy when COVID hit and we all went to work from home and you could no longer walk 10 feet and talk to Mary Jane about the issue, right? So that was a side benefit of this process and that culture being built. We went through that local dev team and we came up with some of the things I've just mentioned here. And then as we went into attempt number 2, that working group sort of wound down. And that's a key piece of this too, is that as we asked people to be on these teams, the message was, you are not on this team forever. This is a working group to generate the work that needs to be done. And then if you can pick up some of that work, great. Otherwise, people will hopefully pick it up as we go. And that's been happening. But it's always been sort of a time-boxed commitment, right? Like, you're not in charge of local dev forever. As we went into attempt number 2, we actually just found that thematically for the topics we were picking, it wasn't really going to work to like work on observability just in the CI process, or right? Like, we kind of needed to, or just security just in production, right? We ended up deciding that those topics, observability and security, which are the ones we picked, were kind of best served by being treated more as like their own theme and then being broken down across the software development lifecycle. So that's been pretty successful. We're in the middle of those groups right now. And I think that's another key to this, is when you're building the plane while you're flying, you have to be flexible, right? Like, well, we built that wing this way, but now we're turning, so we're gonna have to build this wing that way, right? You just gotta be able to adapt to the situation. Those are in progress. So on the observability side, we have members from backend, front end, mobile, QA, and support. And I think bringing support has been one of the most important pieces of that, both from the perspective of answering that question of how do you support continuous delivery, and just from bringing our teams closer. Support has always been in our organization pretty separate from engineering, and it's almost like two people looking at the same thing, but one of them is looking, but through two different funhouse mirrors, right? Like, they have a very unique view of what the apps and infrastructure look like from the engineers, and they don't always mesh. And then when something is going wrong, people are looking at the same thing, but they think it's completely different things. So just bringing those two teams together has helped, even now, on our existing infrastructure and observability tools, to just improve the way that we deal with incidents. On the security team, we have members from backend and front end and mobile and QA. And I should mention that security here is purely application security, not like operational security, right? That's a different effort being done somewhere else, though related. So what works about this process? First is, nothing is real until it's documented. That was something we realized early on, and has been a continuous focus of this, is even the plan to do things, once something is done, it's not done until it's been documented. And part of that too is that, we end up choosing Confluence for the place to put our documentation, but the tool is unimportant. It's really about making sure that you have a good process for creating that documentation. We did not let people into Confluence unless they were writing documentation. And the point of that was, we didn't want 1 million people coming in and just doing all sorts of pages and spaces and stuff. We wanted to have a really good foundation of, this is good documentation, before we brought everyone else in to even read it, and to have the ability to write more. We wanted to have exemplar pieces, and so we were able to get that done. Nobody is an expert, even the experts, right? Like, the tooling, the landscape is changing so fast. To think you are an expert in any of these is the facets of this technology is a mistake. I give lots of talks. People probably look at me like an expert. The best thing I can do for myself is not consider myself one, right? And that's even more critical when you're truly not an expert. As we went into the security group, one of the early discussions asking people to be on that group was, everyone said, well, I'm not an expert in security. And we're just like, look, nobody is, okay? We do not have a dedicated InfoSec person. We are going to be figuring this out as we go. And because of that, everyone is at the same level of expertise, right? And that built people's confidence a lot. I've got 2 members of that team who are very junior, who have been some of the most prolific contributors, because they felt empowered to go out and learn and bring their learning back and bring their expertise. Asynchronous communication is something that was fueled largely by the move to work from home and COVID, but it's been one of the biggest boons. We've moved to a tool that's a little more forum-like, that allows us to sort of post threads and respond to them. It feels like being back and being 19 again, so that's great. In terms of my personal history and being back in a forum. And it's really nice because people get to move a little slower. You might be able to tell from the way that I'm talking that I dominate meetings, right? If I'm in a meeting with someone, as much as I try to give quiet time and give people space to talk and prompt them, I also have ADD, and sometimes I just forget not to interrupt, and it's a terrible practice that I try to get better at, but I can try to move communication to a place where I can't do that. Slack isn't even that great for that, because Slack, there's an immediacy to it, and people feel like they have to respond quickly, right? So moving something to more of a forum-based communications has really helped get richer collaboration from quiet folks, people who don't feel comfortable stepping up and interrupting or just even taking their turn in a meeting and speaking. They can go, and non-experts, they can take time to go do research and come back and make, you know, a full post of information and their opinions. It's been wonderful for facilitating that. And finally, don't force adoption, but don't support old practices. So I kind of alluded to this earlier around how we encourage adoption, but basically once something is, this is the way, we don't, you know, it's not like, okay, now go take 3 months and convert everything you've already done. We're never going to have time to do that. But also when someone comes and says, I want to do thing X, we're like, we don't do that anymore. Let us help you set this up the new way, right? There's maintenance support for old practices, but not for setting new things up. The most important thing, and this is going to instantly date this talk, but this is the Nuggets after they've come back, the Denver Nuggets. I'm from Denver, and so is GoSpotCheck, coming back after their second 3-1 comeback in the playoffs. It's never been done before in NBA history, and now you get a little bit of my tribalism. But don't give up and you defy expectations, right? This has been a hard process. There's been, like I said, buy-in from leadership, but not resource support. You know, every time one of these finishes, it loses momentum, and getting people to pick up the tickets has been hard, but we just kind of keep moving and keep asking, and it gets done. And you know, that's one of the biggest lessons coming out of this for me is if you give up building the plane while it's flying, you will crash. So you just got to keep, you know, going out there and putting more rivets in. I'm Dave Sudia. You can find me pretty much everywhere online at the Developnik, and I'll take some Q&A. Thank you.